Hello again everyone, and welcome to this other presentation. If you remember, some time back I posted a video on understanding the QRH part 1, which was discussing about the preface aspects and also some technical terms that the QRH uses that we had to understand what they mean. And then I even said that I'll be making a series of videos on each chapter on the QRH items. So here is part 2 for you this on this presentation, which I hope you will understand a bit and also enjoy it, and also come to know what certain things mean when they ask us to action certain items based on the emergencies or the urgencies that are present at that time. So part 2 will be discussing on chapter 5. Part 1 was chapter 4 and introduction. So chapter 4 was air conditioning and the like. Chapter 5 is APU, engines and propellers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go over each and every checklist in the QRH, and as we go through each of the items, we will be able to explain to each other as well, or I'll explain to you what I am understanding, or what the understanding should be as regards to how we understand and execute and action the items that are given to us. So let's start by the chapter 5 now, and then we move on. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. The first item on the QRH of the Dash 8 Q400 is on-ground non-normal. So basically, anything you see as a boxed item means that it's a memory item. So we have to commit all the items in all the boxed layouts into our memory, because these are very important and they need to be actioned as quick as we can because of the emergency that we face at that time. So on-ground non-normal would come, for example, let's say you are taking off and you have to abort the takeoff, or we call the rejected takeoff, or you have landed and again you've got to stop as quickly as possible. Say for example you've got an engine fire or engine failure or any other abnormal failures that dictate that you have to do an on-ground non-normal procedure. So the first thing you have to do is to be calm. Now when I say being calm, I've been told this many times as I was starting to fly and even in my initial commercial training, that you have to be calm. And you tend to wonder, what does this mean? What it means is that you have to have the experience so you can be calm. Without an experience, you cannot be calm because you'll be under the influence of panic because you don't know what's happening. So the more you fly, the more you understand your aircraft, and the more you do your recurrence and your trainings, and the more you face all the scenarios that you shouldn't be facing in reality, but they're not impossible, they can happen. At least you get the confidence levels increasing. So the whole point of your trainings and your recurrence, especially your simulators, is to program your mind to exercise being calm. So being calm only comes with more experience. So the first thing you do is you take a deep breath and then you assess what's happening. So let's say we're doing a rejected takeoff. Okay, we are taking off and then all of a sudden an engine fails or engine fire occurs. Or let's say we have a malfunction like a DC bus, which brings so many caution lights on the caution and warning panel. The first thing you will do is that you're going to apply maximum brakes. Simultaneously, you've also retarded the power levers to flight idle, and you keep the center line at all times while you are moving on the runway. When the aircraft comes to a stop, that's when you're going to apply the emergency brake. That's the first item. And then you're going to see what has caused you to make an RTO, a rejected takeoff maneuver. If it's an engine fire, it's an engine fire on ground, which is another memory items coming shortly down below. If it's engine failure, simply tells you put all the both power levers to disk. The affected condition lever, you have to be very careful here. For engine failure, it's affected, so only the engine that has failed, its condition lever has to go to fuel off. You have to be careful because some people in panic mode tend to put both of them down, which isn't wrong, but still more you could have taxied with one of the engines out of the runway to the apron. Okay, and also for the pull fuel hide off handle on the overhead panel, the fire handles, you only pull the affected, and the tank aux pump also for the affected. So here you can see it's only affected, affected, affected. My point here of making these videos for the QRH is from experience, so that we emphasize very clearly on what you should do, because in a training situation, in a simulator, or in a real life situation, God forbid, when you get such situations, you may end up doing a few more things which may give you more problems or which are unnecessary. Okay, so that's for engine failure. If it's other failures, it depends on what the CAUP caution light or warning light came up, and then you'll call for that particular checklist from the QRH. Okay, so the moment you retard your power levers to flight idle, simultaneously applying a maximum brake and keeping the center line of the runway, when you come to a stop, you apply emergency brakes, then you call for on ground non-normal checklist, and then you state which one do you want: engine fire, engine failure, or other failures. Okay, so now we can talk of the engine fire. So for engine fire is exactly here as engine fire. So on ground, so all these are memory items. So in a systematic and well-programmed, well-managed manner, you'll apply the emergency brakes, you'll put both power levers to disk, you'll put both condition levers. You remember the engine failure was only the affected. For the condition levers, here it's going to be both. For the pull fuel hide off handle, in this case it's only again the affected, so not both of them. And the tank aux pumps is also both of them here, not the affected. So you have to distinguish and differentiate between the two. Okay, and then once you switch off the pumps, you go overhead and you push the extinguishing switch to the forward bottle. Once you push it to the forward position, you time for 30 seconds. Now this was a memory item which you had to do immediately. Once you do that, that's when you call for on ground non-normal checklist, engine fire on ground. So let's say we were doing a rejected takeoff, okay, and you suddenly faced an engine fire. The first thing you'll do, maximum brakes, power levers to flight idle, okay, keeping the center line. The moment you stop on the runway, you apply the emergency brakes, then you do your memory items for the engine fire on ground immediately. Once you reach the extinguishing forward bottle, you hack time for 30 seconds, and then you call for the on-ground non-normal checklist. Okay, in that case, the first officer will actually go to this checklist, and then he will verify, or she will verify, that's the engine fire, and then he or she will call out engine fire on ground and check that you have actually executed all these memory items. By then, maybe 30 seconds would have elapsed, and you have to actually check that the fire is out. You don't just go and extinguish the other bottle or deploy the other bottle, because it was unnecessary if the fire was out. So after 30 seconds, before you go and press the toggle switch to the aft position for that engine, you check on the engine fire panel and also on the engine fire lights on the glare shield that they are out. If they are out, the fire has gone. You don't have to push the extinguishing switch to the aft bottle. Many times in the simulator or in the training environment, or sometimes even in reality, we end up deploying both bottles. Now, for example, if you're in a situation where, let's say, you were in the air and you deployed the first bottle for one of the engines and the fire went out. Now, let's say a hypothetical scenario where another engine caught fire. A training situation can give you this one. So now you need to remember you only have two bottles which are mounted in the left wing root in the Q400. If you deploy the other bottle when it was unnecessary to do so, you will not have any fire suppressant or extinguishing facility, and that puts you in a dangerous situation. So before you go and press the aft bottle, check with your eyes that the red lights are indeed out, then you deploy the aft bottle. Very important you remember these things. Make notes of it if you think that you will not remember. Okay, and then afterwards, let's say for example now the 30 seconds has elapsed and the fire is still on, by all means you're going to deploy the aft bottle, and then you're going to call for and wait for a few seconds. I mean, company policies differ. Some say wait for 5-10 seconds. Some companies are in touch with Bombardier to actually know how many seconds should we wait before we command evacuation. You must remember, evacuation is a very strong command. Okay, evacuation tells you and your crew and the passengers that you've got to leave the aircraft immediately. It is different from what you call deplaning. Deplaning is an orderly outflow of passengers when the failure has been dealt with. But evacuation means you've got to call out evacuate, 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 and then you've got to say which side. Is it the left side or the right side? You need to be very clear and concise and careful in how you give your commands so the appropriate door or doors are open. You don't want people to evacuate on the side where there's a fire. Common sense, okay? And then evacuation, once if it is an evacuation, then the captain will call for evacuation checklist, and it's again a memory item. So this time it's just about cross-checking. The emergency brake is set, yes it is. Power levers are both at disk, yes they are. Condition levers both fuel off. And now here comes the pull fill height of handles. They need to be both pulled, okay? Both of them handles should be pulled. And then you go to the emergency lights, you switch them on in case it was dark, smoke or night. Fasten belts obviously should go off, and then evacuate. So you go on the PA, you're going to say evacuate, 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 use the left hand side or the right hand side. And just for your situational awareness, you can go on the systems page on the MFD and put the doors system so that you can see which doors are being opened. So once you confirm everything is okay, then you will have to switch off the aircraft by switching off the AC, external power, or AP if it was on the ground by during start, and then you have to put them off and the battery master off. So the whole point of this drill is to be calm, concise, and do things in an orderly way. And once again, the more you do this in your training, the more second-hand nature it becomes. Initially, people do panic, and then we start doing some things which are not necessary, and that's the whole purpose of you guys training, or all of us training every 6 months for such scenarios. Okay, so I'm hoping that it's made sense. A few things maybe you did know, you didn't know. You can obviously repeat this video from where you want it, and you can hear what I've said. Okay, and after that we go to aborted engine start. Now here there's a proper video which I've already made for this, so I don't think I'll go too much into this, okay, because that video explains everything on reasons of aborted engine starts and what to do when as far as this checklist is concerned. So I want you to really look at that video as far as aborted engine start is concerned. Okay, the next item is no starter cutout. So the moment you reach 50% and the toggle switch, the engine start select switch, remains at its position, either engine 2 or engine 1, and the start light remains illuminated. So it's not a memory item. You can still call for no starter cutout checklist, okay? But if you know your QRH well, you know that the first item should be start select off. So you are always fine to go ahead and put the start select switch off. This is just going to prevent you from burning the starter. Okay, again, it's not a memory item, but you don't even keep it there, hanging in there for no apparent reason. You may damage the mechanism for nothing. Okay, and then you can call for the no starter cutout checklist. Now it's very important that you go through these things very carefully. If you remember from the aborted engine start video that I posted a while ago, just before this one, I did say that the start and select light, or I explained rather, that they take 15 seconds. So every parameter for that particular engine should stabilize by around 20 seconds. And after 15 seconds on top of the 20, making it 35, to around 38 seconds, all these two lights on the switch light should go off. That's where the 15 seconds is coming from. So by 20 seconds, maximum 22 seconds, all the parameters should stabilize. Okay, and you should just visit the video again so I've told you there exactly which parameters you look out for, and even the time limits for each of them from experience and from normal day-to-day starts. Okay, so this is where the 15 seconds comes from. Okay, so all in all, around 35 to 38 seconds, all the lights should be off and all the parameters should be stabilized. If the light is still remaining on beyond 38, 40 and over 40 seconds, something is wrong. Okay, then the checklist say the DC external power, if it was on, it has to go off. Now you have to go to a yes and no scenario. So then you look at the affected DC gen quotient light is illuminated. Affected meaning for the particular engine. You don't look at the other one, you look at for the particular engine. If it's illuminated, if it's a yes, you go to its switch, you take it to off, then on. Then you check again, is it still illuminated? It's a yes, DC gen switch off. Now it says maintenance action required by next flight. This is one of the phrases that I explained in the very first part 1, where I talked of the introduction and the air conditioning, which I also incorporated in that part. So maintenance action required by next flight means that you have discovered that the light is still illuminated, so you cannot go. You cannot go. You have to call the maintenance or the technician so that they fix this problem, and thereafter, if it's all good to go, then you can go. Okay, prior to next flight means, if you look at the QRH, the introductory part, it clearly says that it's when you have an imminent takeoff, just prior to discovery. So when you discover this fault, and then you know that, okay, I have to take off after this, you can't take off. Okay, get it fixed first. So in simple language, get it fixed, then you depart. That's all. That's what this means. Get it fixed, then you depart. Okay, and if the affected DC gen quotient light did not illuminate after the action you completed on top here, then you check for the affected DC gen load for normal indications. Now the flight may depart, but maintenance action required after landing. So now you've got to be very careful. You can't just depart to an airport where you may not have maintenance personnel or you don't have a technician on board. You've got to confirm with your operations and the maintenance team that I have faced this problem of no starter cutout, and I don't have any caution lights illuminated right now, especially the DC gen caution light is not illuminated, but nonetheless I have to make sure that this has to be fixed at the destination. Do you have maintenance personnel there? Yes or no? If they don't, I don't think you'll go, because the QRH says you have to fix this problem after landing. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So the whole idea is just to make sense of all these items and how they should be perceived. The other one is starter failure on ground. So basically here it's just you just action all these items as they come in the list. How do you know it's starter failure on ground? The select light this time remain illuminated. So again, after 15 seconds, it's perhaps maybe 38, 40 going onwards, select light still remains illuminated. Now we have a problem. So all you do here, you have to shut down the aircraft. It's not a memory item, so you go step by step and do all these actions as per the QRH. It's pretty much obvious, and of course this is now to do with a maintenance issue. Okay, APU fire is a memory item. Basically you need to understand that you have an APU fire, what are you going to be looking out for? So you do confirm, you look at the APU panel and you see that the run advised light, which is in green, is gone out, and on the fire protection panel overhead on the APU section on the left hand side, the fail, the bottle low and the fuel valve flow advised lights are illuminating. Okay, if you keep reading the QRH on a daily basis like what I do every morning, then some of these things you'll just have them in your mind. So if you have an APU fire, immediately your hand should go on the stop clock, okay, and you set time for 7 seconds. Okay, because people may ask, where does 7 seconds starts from? Of course it starts from the time when you were told that there's a fire by the ground personnel, but that might have been a delay as well. All right, so It doesn't say that you have to do this, but if you are like me, who has had some I've learned it the hard way, actually, the QRH. So I've tried to commit to memory most of these time values. So immediately, if I know APU fire, I'll just go straight to the stop clock and start timing. And then I'll call for the APU fire checklist. I've done my memory items. And then after 7 seconds, I've seen, oh, the APU bottle arm and the APU fire advisory lights are still on the overhead. That means that I'm going to go and press the extinguishing switch. Okay. After that, it's just a post APU automatic shutdown, which is this one here. Pretty much again self-explanatory in terms of what it says here. A caution here: do not restart the APU following the APU automatic shutdown if the fire advisory light is illuminated. Obvious reasons, you don't want to start the APU if it's not on fire. Okay, so in this case you do call for the fire trucks as well on the ground and other assistance, so that they can help in extinguishing the fire if the aircraft fire extinguishing mechanisms are not adequate sometimes. Okay, just for safety. So make sure these things are taken very much seriously. APU start failure, basically it's you'll have again a fail light advisory light on the APU panel on the start switch light. Okay, and then you just action again these memory items here. Sorry, excuse me, not memory items. These items you just call for the APU start failure checklist. And also one more thing, yes, when you call for the checklist, make sure you're calling for the proper checklist in a proper, concise way, as it has to be as per the QRH. You don't just call for a particular checklist which you know you're calling for the right one, but in your own wording. Okay, so make sure it's like APU start failure checklist. Okay, very important that you call for the proper checklist. The rest here, I don't see anything that is out of the ordinary. It's just pretty much self-explanatory, which you can read and do. APU starter failure, again, it's a shutting down of the aircraft again, just like the engine starter failure checklist dictated. The caution light on the COP, APU caution light checklist, will come when you have either of these three lights illuminated on the switch lights on the APU panel. You can have an APU failure, APU gen overheat, or APU generator failure, and one of these will bring the APU caution on the COP, and then you'll action this checklist by calling out the appropriate checklist. Okay, I'm going slowly so I can pick up anything that might be out of the ordinary, but here most of it is self-explanatory. Okay, APU bleed air overheat, again you might have all these caution lights coming on the COP, so all you do, you just switch off the APU bleed so it doesn't give you further problems. Okay, and then the next one is an engine air start. Engine air start, basically just remember that you have an engine failure in the cruise, let's say 25,000 feet cruising, and you have an engine failure. So you will do your SOP procedures as per your company. In the company I work for, the SOP procedures say you disconnect the autopilot, condition lever to max, power rating detent. IAS you set to drift down. Now if you don't remember the drift down value, the drift down value will be very much near the V climb speed. That's very important. And if you use the speed card, the V climb speed is exactly on the speed card. So you can initially set that. Sometimes it's in the region of 140 to 150, somewhere around there. Okay, and then you command for the shutdown of the engine, shutdown engine number 1 or shutdown engine number 2, and then you do the memory items. The memory items of complete, then you call for set MCP, engage autopilot. Once you've engaged the autopilot, you're going to set a lower altitude on the altitude knob, and once you've said that's going to be a drift down altitude anyway, and then you'll initiate a descent after asking the controller that you have an engine failure and you'd like to descend to a suitable level to maybe execute an air start if it's needed. Okay, and then you call for the engine air start checklist. Well, it will be engine failure, fire shutdown checklist, and then the engine air start checklist if you have to actually start the engine if you think starting is an option. So the parameters there, you must make sure that you are below 20,000 feet. You can see in this envelope here, it's very important, okay, that you are in between below 20,000 feet, and the temperature as indicated on the ED should be in the region of minus 40 degrees minimum, okay, minimum minus 40 degrees. So you cannot relight if it's way more less than this. So let's say it's 41, 42, minus 41, minus 42, minus 45. You cannot relight the engine. You've got to be more than minus 40. Okay, so as it is, the further down you go, the higher the temperature. So this limitation could be met, or should be met rather. Okay, and thereafter, if you think, okay, the malfunction of the engine just flamed out because of some ingestion or maybe incorrect manipulation of the controls by accident, then you can definitely ask for an air start. Okay, and then you have got to monitor that engine, monitor it continuously throughout the flight. Okay, and this is all a decision of the captain. And then it's just a matter of executing all these items to start the engine. Okay, the moment the engine fires up, you must be ready to control the aircraft because your autopilot may disengage. Okay, so it's very important that you have control of the aircraft so the yaw does not disengage the autopilot. And that's about engine air starts. Start a failure in flight. Again, the select light may remain illuminated. Let's say you are doing an air start, so you definitely have to execute these items here. And then it says land immediately at nearest suitable airport. So it means that you've got to go to your en route alternate, or the one which is more closer. If your destination is more closer, good and well, go and land your destination. If your departure was more closer, go to the departure, or you go to an en route alternate, obviously taking into account of the weather at the destination, or the en route alternate, or the departure. So you've got to always be wary of the weather conditions, type of approaches, and the like. And obviously you liaise with the ATC for such cases. Okay, here's another easy one. These are just memory items. The moment you have an oil pressure warning light, or you see the oil pressure gauge is showing below 44 psi, that is not a very good thing at all, and it just tells you to execute the engine failure fire shutdown checklist, which we will be coming to as we progress through this part of the QRH. Okay, so memory item. So you got to call for engine failure fire shutdown checklist. You have to shut down the engine for obvious reasons. You do not want to run an engine with a low oil pressure. You are just going to damage the gearing mechanisms. There is no lubrication. The engine will be running dry, and you may damage it to a point where there will be so much friction, a fire can result, and I don't think you want to end up in such situations. So it's a very important thing, early noticing it and saying, this is not good, let's shut this engine down. Okay, and then low oil pressure is 44 to 60 psi. So now this is very important. The moment you have low oil pressure, or some people what they do, low oil pressure, shut down. Okay, there are certain situations where you don't need to shut down the engine at all. You can run it at low power. So now look at what it says here. Let's say you have you see one of the gauges of, let's say, engine number 1, engine number 2, and the oil pressure is around 50. Okay, for example, between 44 and 60. You say, okay, this doesn't look right. So you bring the power lever so of course you call for the checklist first, low oil pressure checklist. Okay, 44 to 60 psi. So power lever of that engine goes to flight idle. Condition lever, start feather. And then you look if the propeller has feathered. Normally below 200 RPM means the propeller has feathered, somewhere around there. If it hasn't feathered, that's when you're going to go and press the alternate feather switch. Okay, now you check, has the oil pressure gone up, or it still remains below 44 psi. If it still remains below 44 psi, that's when you execute the memory items for shutting down the engine, because it's calling you to do the oil pressure below 44 psi checklist. You don't just go and shut down before monitoring what has happened to the oil pressure after you executed these actions. Okay, very important. Then Another one will be high oil pressure. Now it's going to be above 72 psi. So as I said again, that if you are one of those who will be reading the QRH on a daily basis, like what I do, and this habit I definitely would encourage any pilot on any fleet to be doing every morning. You have the QRH, you're ready, and you read it before you work, or even if you're on off duty, your QRH, it has to be followed religiously, like very important, because you have to have it in your mind. It's not to do that you have to memorize it, but time and again it will come to memory, most of the stuff. So if I were to note that, oh, my oil pressure on a particular engine is shooting above 72 psi, I'll remember that, okay, the first thing I can do is to reduce the torque of that engine by 20%. Okay, I have kept this figure in my mind, and I always have it in front of my mind. Okay, so let's say your torque was, argument's sake, 60%, you'll bring it down to 40%. Okay, reduce by 20%. Okay, now when you do that, you then monitor oil pressure, and then you just time 2 minutes. I would remember this because I read this every day. Okay, so I'll call for the high oil pressure checklist, but in the same time I've already done this item here, which is not a memory item as I keep saying, but because I keep reading day and day again, I know that if I have a high oil pressure situation, the first thing I'll do, reduce the torque by 20%, not to, but by. Remember, this English is very important. Not to 20%, but by 20%. So whatever the torque reading is, subtract 20, that's going to be your new setting. And then you time for 2 minutes. Now, after 2 minutes, you're going to check for a few things. First, you check for the oil pressure. Okay, has it decreased by 72 psi or less? Because it was around 72. 69, 70 are good figures normally. That's what I see in normal operations. But if it's going above 72 to 80 somewhere, then we do have a problem. So after you did this action here, bringing the power to 20%, and then after 2 minutes, you see, okay, the pressure has decreased to 72 or less. Then you don't shut down the engine. It says here, maintain power at or below the adjusted torque setting for the remainder of the flight. You can continue the flight. Of course, you have liaised with your maintenance guys that, listen, I have this issue, but according to my readings now, the oil pressure is within limits, and I'm going to continue my flight, but with this sort of setting. Obviously after landing I'll need maintenance. Okay, so it says maintenance action required prior to next flight. Okay, but if you've done again these things about reduction of the power by 20% after 2 minutes, and you say, oh, the oil pressure still is above 72%, now 72 psi, now you say, okay, we have to shut it down. So you call for the engine failure, fire, shutdown checklist. In the simulator they give you scenarios. They're giving it to me. I blundered initially, I shut down the whole engine, and the instructor was very kind to tell me, please see what you are doing. Okay, so talking from experience. Okay, everybody fails. Certain failures are correctable, and then we've got to share them, is what I'm doing here. Okay, so make sure in such cases, check before you do the final thing of shutting down an engine, because an engine can be run at low power. Okay, it's not necessary to shut it down if the conditions don't warrant it. Okay, then we come to our next one. Is about high oil temperature in flight. So now you look at temperature gauge, and now it's above 107 degrees or above, and you'll be like, oops, this looks very high. It's going into the red as well. So again, I keep saying about reading of the QRH. If I had to note this, I would again bring the power lever of that particular engine to drop it by 20% torque. Then I'll keep monitoring and see what's happening. Okay, so it's very important that you know that with an oil temperature greater than 107 degrees, the affected oil temperature indication will be red, and it will catch your eye immediately. So now, here we go. We've decreased the power by 20%. Now we've got to check oil temperature at or below 115 degrees centigrade. Yes or no? Yes. If it's a yes, maintain power at or below the adjusted torque setting for the remainder of the flight. Monitor oil temperature and the maintenance actions. Don't shut it down. Okay, check this first of all. If it's yes, it's okay. So now here we check it again after reduction by 20%, and we say, oops, the oil temperature is still above 115 degrees centigrade. What do we do? Let's try one more method. Maybe let's do this. Power lever of affected engine, flight idle. Now you are putting it to flight idle. Before it was just a reduction, you remember? Now it's just flight idle, and the condition lever of the affected engine start feather. That's another thing you've done now. The first one failed. Now you've done the second attempt to see if it works out. And now if the oil temperature decreases, then you just continue the flight the way it is at that setting. So the power lever will flight idle, the condition lever will start feather, and you just continue your flight, of course liaising with maintenance. But still more, if the oil temperature has not decreased after all these actions you've done, now we come back to the final resort, which means to shut down that engine. I hope this is making sense. So you can see how systematically we go through these items. You don't just see an abnormal situation and immediately go and shut down the engine. You don't need to. Unless it's a very serious thing, unless it's a bang or something, then yes, of course, you know something is obvious. But certain things, you don't just go and shut it down. You have to just go step by step doing the actions in a calm way, slowly. Take your time, deep breath. You know, every pilot you'll see who gets the experience as we go along will be saying the same things to you. But as I keep saying again, calmness comes with experience. Okay, and then if you have a low oil temperature, low oil temperature basically is isn't too much here. Just don't be in icing conditions. Just exit icing. If you are in clouds, go down below and just monitor the affected engine performance. Okay, so it's very important that you know this. Now these items are for Department of Transport, which is Canada, or the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration for the USA only. And these are types. This is what we use for our operations. The same checklists for these particular items will come for EASA operators as well, which are a bit different in some values. Okay, but I'm not going to go into those. I'm just going to talk of what I do at my operations, but there's nothing different to what I've said for the EASA as well. Okay, so now let's continue with the next. Okay, so for dual propeller overspeed, basically propeller overspeed meaning that the RPM is going to go beyond 1020. It's going to go to 1071 or somewhere around there. It will turn into amber. Both of them will turn into amber, and you'll have number 1 peg and number 2 peg caution light. There'll be a bit of noise, so you don't have to panic. You just look at your RPM gauge and look, okay, the RPM has gone shot up, so what do I do? Okay, it just says land at the nearest suitable airport. This clearly means you can continue the flight. Very uncomfortable though, very noisy. You don't want to do that. Okay, so basically you just find a suitable airport to land. If you are near the destination, you go destination. If you are near the departure, you go back to the departure. If you have an alternate in between, you go and land at the alternate, because it says land at the nearest suitable airport. Flight may continue, okay, but you just need to know that it will be uncomfortable, and I think the best way is just to bring the aircraft to the ground and seek maintenance advice, because other faults may develop from this as well. Okay, so here there isn't much. During overspeed governor control, an increase in power or turbulence encounter may cause the propeller speed to temporarily exceed 1080. So you don't even be into a turbulent situation as well. And with power levers in the rating D10, the torque indication will be less than the displayed torque rating. Just something for you to observe. Okay, and landing considerations basically says all this. This distance factor here, basically what you do is that you take the runway length that you're going to land at and multiply it by these numbers, and then you check if you are fit to land in that distance. That's what it means. Okay, so if runway is long enough, there's no point in applying these factors, but if you think, okay, this runway, let me see, if I apply let's say a 1.35 or factor, meaning multiply by the runway length, am I getting enough length to land? Some of these are also done on tables. There are also tables in the QRH as well, where you can actually plot the lines and graphs and obtain your readings. Okay, so basically very important, and the other things are just notes here, nothing much, pretty much not a memory item as well. And then prop overspeed. Propeller overspeed basically is a memory item. So here what you see, let's say you've taken off, you've departed, and then all of a sudden one of the propeller RPM gauges goes to amber, and it makes a bit of a noise above 1071, somewhere around there, and then you have a PEC number 1 or PEC number 2 caution light coming on. So since you've taken off, what it asks you to do, or it can even happen in the cruise, it asks you to execute the memory item. So it says here above 400 feet AGL, so you have to check your above 400 feet AGL, bring the power lever of that particular just bring both power levers basically to 200 knots, somewhere around there where the flap configuration and flight conditions are suiting for that particular speed. So minimum speed I would go for 200. It's safer, it's a configuration speed as well, and it's also slower. Okay, but other companies and other operators may say something different on this, which I don't know, but 200 would be a very good figure to adjust your speed to. And then you look, and affected engine, you look at it, okay, power lever flight idle, condition lever start feather. Has it feathered? That's a very important thing. You don't just go start and feather, then you go to alternate feather. The alternate feather is a secondary means. If your primary means of feathering using the condition lever has not feathered the propeller, then you do the alternate feather. Okay, and then you say yes or no. Has the propeller feathered? If it has feathered, then you're going to go and do the engine failure fire shutdown checklist right here. If it hasn't feathered, it says here do not shut down the engine. So your finger should have been alternate feather switch light. Switch it off, condition levers, both of them to max, and bring those power levers together, so you operate them together. And then it says here land immediately at the nearest suitable airport. So you do not want to continue with an unfeathered propeller because of drag. Okay, you'll have a lot of drag, okay, and there will be a lot of asymmetry in the flight, okay, dangerous as well. And if you end up in turbulent situations and the like, I don't think you want to be in such situations with this sort of condition. So land immediately nearest suitable airport. Okay, and a bit of notes here for you to read, which you can do, nothing much, landing distance factor and the like. So then we have very others are very simple. Number 1 PEC or number 2 PEC caution light. Just to ask you a question, let's say you had one of these lights coming in on the takeoff roll. Okay, would you reject the takeoff? Maybe you can answer this question in the comments, and let's see if we can agree on your answers. Okay, let's say you were on the roll, takeoff, and all of a sudden after 80 knots, ting, number 1 PEC or number 2 PEC caution light comes on. Would you reject the takeoff? Even before 80 knots, would you reject the takeoff? Think about it and maybe suggest your answers. Unscheduled propeller feathering is a memory item. So a propeller has just feathered without you commanding it to feather. So what do? You shut it down, okay, because there is no point in flying with a feathered propeller. So the power lever to flight idle, you call for the engine failure fire shutdown checklist. So you look at the RPM gauge, the torque will go very high, and the RPM just shows below 200, and you're like, oops, this propeller has feathered. Okay, shut it down. Propeller ground range advised light cycling, these are just straight in front of the captain there on the glare shield. Okay, they are like in bluish color. If you see them going 1 2 1 2 1 2, just bring all the power put the power levers above flight idle. You don't want to be below flight idle. Okay, and then some notes here for you to consider, and then the landing distance factor as well. Okay, so very important that in this case do not select, so you can continue the flight, by the way, if you bring it above flight idle. So you continue the flight and then apply what it says on this QRH item here. Okay, FADEC fail. FADEC fail warning light is a memory item. If you have a FADEC failure, FADEC is the brain of the computer. If that has failed, means the engine will not perform at all in a nice way, which you don't want. Shut down the engine. Simple as that, period. Okay, shut down the engine, that's it. And if you have a FADEC caution light, that's different to a FADEC warning light. A warning light is shut down. Caution light, you call for the caution light checklist, and then you execute the items here. Power lever, adjust slowly and smoothly. So you might have an asymmetry in the power levers. One will be a bit ahead of the other, okay? And that's how you'll fly. It's flyable, but landing would, as soon as possible, would be the best option as well, okay? Power plant ED message. Monitor engine performance. Maintenance action required prior to next flight. You have this message on your ED. It's a no-go item, period. Okay, it's a no-go item. You have to get the fault cleared. Okay, last of the items here, not last but one, are these two. Check fire detect warning light and fault A or fault B advisory light, and check fire detect warning light and bottle low advisory light. Interesting. Let's say the check fire detect warning light came as you are doing a takeoff roll. Okay, so when a warning light comes, it gives you 3 chimes, ting, 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 and you see check fire detect warning light. Immediately, your instinct will tell you, whoops, I have a fire, and you start rejecting the takeoff. Okay, just be a bit careful. You have this, but your eyes should be gazing everything. You look at the engine fire light and even on top, and if you don't have those lights, you don't have a fire. And then you might have this with a fault A or a fault B light, and this is just a maintenance action required by your next flight. So if you're on takeoff roll, you continue, okay, you continue, and you just have to basically come back and land. You don't have to reject the takeoff. That's what I mean, okay? Because why would you come back and land is because you've detected the fault, okay? And it says a fire detector loop failure. So for example, let's say you go with this fault, or you go with these faults, and then, God forbid, you suffer an engine fire. It means that you will not have any suppression mechanisms, all right? So in this case, I wouldn't reject the takeoff. I will go airborne, okay, and I'll come back and land immediately, okay, knowing that I have to fix this problem. In case I have a fire, it means that I don't have any fire suppression mechanisms that will assist me to fight the fire. Okay, so rejecting a takeoff is a very difficult decision sometimes. Some people tend to reject on many reasons which are not proper reasons to do an RTO, and some people reject on valid reasons. Everything comes with experience, and the more you fly and the more you read and the more you understand which failure warrants a RTO and which failure does not require an RTO. Okay, so it's always good to go up, go to MSA, come back and land. Okay, last one on this section is our engine failure fire shutdown checklist, which we've been seeing coming in the previous couple of items. So here it's very simple. You have to commit this to memory. I have memorized it using a mnemonic. If you see the first letters of all of these items here, it's pronounced as P capped. So I just keep P capped I E I E. If extinguish, if extinguish. Okay, so P capped is what I keep in my mind. Okay, power lever, condition lever, alternate feather, pull fill of handle, and tank aux pump. Basically that's what I memorized and I keep in my mind. Okay, and after you've executed the memory items, then once you've called for the checklist, then the other checklist items will follow for that particular engine. All right, and then it will be executed until the engine is shut down and secured, and then you are flying with one engine, no big deal. Learning consideration, we have all this here which we've talked about, and I think that's pretty much about it for the engine and APU and propeller section. I think I've just talked of what I know. So the bottom line here is to make good decisions, that you don't just go ahead and do an RTO or shut down an engine. Go through each item very carefully, commit all these things, memory items to memory. Obviously you've got to commit the box items to memory, but as I keep saying, your QRH is like a sacred book, if I should use that word, but it's very important that you need to know all the emergencies and how to deal with them from the top of your head. for any fleet that you fly. It will save you and then make you understand what you are doing and what you shouldn't do. That's about it, I think, for now. We'll produce a next video on another QRH item until we finish all of them as we go along. Thank you very much, and happy landings.